Tensions between Washington and Tehran are once again at their peak after 2 oil tankers were attacked on June 13th near the entrance to the Persian Gulf. The incidents were the second in a month, and US officials were quick to blame Iran but cited no proof. Iran meanwhile denied any wrongdoing. Although it's unclear what exactly happened, the event has stoked fears that a military confrontation between Iran and the United States is imminent. Truth, however, is the first casualty of war, and so it matters little what truly happened. Yet miscalculation, misinterpretation, and bad judgment can conspire to turn a minor clash into a full-blown fight. What we want to know is how a hypothetical conflict between Iran and the United States would play out. I'm your host Shirvan, and welcome to Caspian Report. Cybersecurity is a growing concern that affects not only government institutions, but also individuals. You can secure your devices with NordVPN, which has more than 5,000 servers in 62 countries, and thus uses double data encryption for increased anonymity. Plus, since the company is registered in Panama, there are no data logging regulations. So, if you've been thinking about cybersecurity and privacy, just go to nordvpn.com/CaspianReport or use the link in the description. You'll get a 70% discount on the 3-year plan. And if you use the promo code CaspianReport, you'll get an additional month for free. Now back to our thought experiment. The most relevant precedent for an American-Iranian conflict was the Millennium Challenge 2002 war game, which pitted the United States against Iran. It was the largest exercise of its kind, racking up a total cost of roughly $250 million and involving some 13,500 participants with numerous live training sites. 2 days into the simulation, the Iranian team sent 19 US ships, including 1 aircraft carrier, to the bottom of the Persian Gulf. In real life, it would have resulted in the deaths of about 20,000 American troops. What happened was that the general leading the Iranian team adopted an asymmetric strategy and used old methods to evade the American surveillance network, such as motorcycle messengers, camouflaged civilian boats, kamikaze speedboats, coded messages, etc. The war game was meant to test future military technologies, but ended in humiliation. So much so that the exercise was reset, with new rules of engagement being rigged in favor of the Americans. As the authentic war game became a scripted event, the leader of the Iranian team resigned, claiming that the purpose of the war game was to reinforce existing notions of American supremacy rather than serving as a learning experience. The Millennium Challenge is a reminder that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, and miscalculation is just around the corner. The most likely cause for an American-Iranian war would be by small deniable attacks. Both sides could start such provocations. Imagine the Shia militias in Iraq with close connections to the Iranian security apparatus targeting US military convoys and killing several American troops. From experience, Tehran knows that such minor attacks do not result in direct retaliation from Washington, provided they are deniable. For instance, the US Defense Department estimates that from 2003 to 2011, a little more than 600 American troops were killed by Iranian proxies in Iraq. These kinds of small, deniable attacks are of little consequence. It is only when politicians decide to push ahead with political goals that such events are used to justify actions. In our imaginary scenario, the United States sends aircraft carriers, battleships, long-range bombers, and missile batteries to the Persian Gulf to reassure its allies. An additional 120,000 troops are deployed to the American bases in the Middle East, a figure that is close to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Not surprisingly, the Iranians perceive the maneuver as a signal that Trump is gearing up for a widespread attack. Tehran responds by moving its missiles and naval mines out of storage and dispersing them. Although neither side wants a fight, and both parties are merely seeking to defend their interests from an attack by the other, the climate of mutual mistrust and the pressure of time leads to misunderstanding. Add to this Trump's tendency to go off on Twitter, and we have a recipe where a slight attack can ignite severe retaliation. As was the case in the Millennium Challenge 2002 wargame, Iran's best defense is an immediate and devastating preemptive strike. Knowing this, the Americans decide to preempt Iran's preemptive strike. As such, the Pentagon uses its existing air and naval assets in the Middle East to hit ports, ships, and training facilities along the Iranian coast. The operation largely resembles the US airstrikes in Syria in 2017 and 2018, limited to a few dozen sorties. Immediately after the attack, Trump communicates through public channels that the incursion was a one-time strike and that if Iran backs down, there will be no further consequences. Ideally, the Iranian leadership pulls back and things end there. But this time it's different. President Rouhani's political opponents bash him for being weak while his approval ratings take a nosedive. He is forced to act and illustrate his resolve. To do so, the Iranian leadership has a wide range of options, from proxy forces in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and Afghanistan to ballistic missiles that can target American outposts and bases in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. Meanwhile, in the realm of cyberspace, the Iranian paramilitary goods force can sabotage and shut down a significant portion of Saudi oil production. Finally, in the Persian Gulf, Iranian anti-ship missiles, kamikaze speedboats, and sophisticated naval mines can wreak havoc in the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 40% of the world's seaborne oil passes. The slightest sense of panic would drive up global oil prices and disrupt the world economy, possibly even triggering the next recession. The point is, asymmetric warfare is the primary strength of the Iranians, and they know it. In our thought war game, Tehran decides to save face and retaliates by dropping a few dozen naval mines in the Persian Gulf and by commanding its proxies to target US troops, aid workers, and diplomats across the Middle East. With the number of dead Americans piling up, the Pentagon recommends going big. Bolton and Pompeo support the plan and convince Trump that it's the only viable course of action. As the logic of escalation conspires a minor clash into a regional blaze, US bombers hit conventional Iranian targets and destroy much of the country's nuclear infrastructure in Natanz, Esfahan, Arak, Fordow, etc. Still, Washington stops short of an all-out war. On the other side of the fence, however, the Iranians believe they are at full-out war and launch a powerful counterattack. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed off with hundreds of naval mines, while small Iranian kamikaze boats, drones, and a fleet of mini-subs deter and harass the American fleet in the Persian Gulf. As a countermeasure, the United States uses surface vessels for surveillance and reconnaissance to detect or eliminate the Iranian attacks. Nevertheless, some attacks and losses cannot be avoided. Likewise, the price of oil skyrockets to $150 per barrel and stagnates GDP growth worldwide. Having crossed the point of no return, Tehran launches as many missiles as it can at US military bases in the area over the next few days. At the same time, Iranian proxy militias target US troops in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, while the proxy groups in Yemen launch a barrage of rockets against Saudi Arabia and overflow parts of the Red Sea with naval mines and thereby damages the trade passing through the Suez Canal. The global economy takes another beating. At some point, Israel gets drawn into the conflict and clashes with Hezbollah. Iran decides to raise the stakes for the United States by hitting Israel. As such, Tehran directs Hezbollah to attack Israel using its arsenal of some 130,000 rockets. The assault overwhelms Israel's Iron Dome missile system, leaving the Israelis with little choice but to invade southern Lebanon and even parts of Syria in order to eradicate Hezbollah's local strongholds. What began as a tit-for-tat now affects much of the Middle East. After weeks of US airstrikes with an average 1,200 strike sorties a day, the regular Iranian army is rendered inoperable, but the proxy groups are harder to terminate. As the fighting drags on, Israeli and Saudi lobbying groups in Washington call for the overthrow of the Iranian government. The situation is reminiscent of the assault on Libya in 2011, where the United States stumbled into a regime change operation and lacked a clear objective. This time, however, the scale is vastly larger. Iran turns out to be a whole different battle space. Nearly the entire country is mountainous, which raises the costs of an invasion into the trillions of dollars. This isn't even considering the destabilizing effects of a refugee crisis stemming from such destruction. As such, nobody in the White House advocates a large-scale occupation. The price is simply too costly. Instead, the US government tries to engineer the collapse of the Islamic Republic without having to invade it. Yet, unlike many of the other Middle Eastern nations, Iran is not an artificial creation of European colonialism, but an ancient civilization whose nationalism runs deep. Most of the 82 million citizens rally behind the Ayatollah's banner, including opposition groups. Even if somehow the religious government is cast out, the most likely faction to inherit the state would be the powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, turning the country into a military dictatorship. At worst, a public uprising could lead to civil war and the Balkanization of Iran. Such destabilizing circumstances would create extremist safe havens as well as increase the flow of refugees to Europe. In all likelihood, the Iranian government remains in place as a weakened nation. And even though the US strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure have set the country back by several years, the conflict has convinced the Iranians to restart their nuclear program and take it further underground to construct an actual nuclear weapon, a goal it had thus far abated. On the whole, the United States would emerge victoriously, but not before tying itself down in yet another Middle Eastern conflict for decades to come. Such a long-term commitment would drain the resources of Washington while granting Russia and China a window of opportunity to revive a multipolar world. Thus, ironically, by winning the war in Iran, the United States is likely to lose its status as the world's sole superpower. Fortunately, all the involved parties understand the dangers and catastrophic fallout of a full-blown conflict, not least the Iranian government. For this reason, a fight between Washington and Tehran is unlikely to occur. However, the pressure of time, the climate of mistrust, the uncertainty of intelligence, and the presence of thousands of troops in the region leaves open the chance of misreading signals and miscommunication, which could conspire an insignificant act into a deadly collision with devastating results. I've been your host, Shirvan from Caspian Report. Special thanks to our Patreon community for making content like this possible and enabling us to operate independently. If you want to join our community with all its perks, visit patreon.com/CaspianReport. Thank you for watching and Sarol.